Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia with me, Scott Craig. Ed Miliband, the leader of the Labour Party in the UK, has called for the rules on bonuses paid by financial institutions to be changed, not only at part publicly owned banks like the Royal Bank of Scotland, but across the board, in his words. Mr. Miliband's call comes in the wake of the controversy surrounding the RBS chief executive Stephen Hester, who announced over the weekend that he would not be taking a bonus of over £963,000 he was due in shares. The bank's chairman, Sir Philip Hampton, also waived a bonus of £1.4 million. The government said it would not intervene directly in setting executive pay at RBS, despite owning 82% of its shares. Though the PM has urged RBS to show restraint over further bonuses. But should bonuses be paid at banks that are in effect state-controlled in a time of financial austerity, or is it a price that needs to be paid to retain talent, as the banks urge? Or has it simply become open season on bankers' bonuses? To discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Emma Boon from the Taxpayers Alliance, Len Shackleton, who's a fellow at the Institute for Economic Affairs, and on the line by Ronnie Fox, who's a lawyer at his firm Fox, which specialises in, amongst other things, employment law. Len Shackleton, let me come to you first. Simple question. Should banks that are in effect state-controlled be paying bonuses at all?
Yes, of course they should. Bonuses play a very useful function in remuneration for all sorts of jobs. And there are plenty of people who are paid bonuses in the public sector and always have been. So I don't see that there is any exception to be made for the case of Stephen Hester.
Emma Boon, do you accept that argument?
Well, I think Stephen Hester's in the unique position of heading up a bank that was bailed out by taxpayers. And if you factor in the current climate in the UK, the public sector pay freeze, and the fact that many taxpayers are struggling with their own finances, I think it's politically unacceptable for him to take that bonus at a time like this.
I do want to come on to this distinction between what is legally permissible and what is ethically acceptable to the public in a moment. But first, Ronnie Fox, let me just ask you the same straight question. Do you think banks like the Royal Bank of Scotland that are in effect state-controlled should be paying bonuses?
It's essential that they pay bonuses if they want to compete with banks which are not state-controlled.
The crucial question in this whole debate seems to be this link between pay and performance. In the case of RBS, the bank has improved its performance. It's profitable again, albeit after an injection of state capital. Doesn't therefore that mean that they should be able to pay bonuses to make the bank more attractive, Emma Boon?
I don't think that Stephen Hester's done a fantastic job this year in terms of improving the situation that RBS is in. The share price drops, yes, across the markets we did see share prices drop as well in other banks, but I don't think that's to say that he should have some sort of get out of jail free card and be able to hold his hands up and say, well, none of this is my fault. In taking the job at the head of RBS, he knew very much that he was taking the top job at a bank that had been bailed out by taxpayers. It would have been very naive of him to go into that thinking that public opinion wouldn't play a part in whether or not he would be able to accept a bonus. So I think it's wrong to say that, that none of this is his fault and that he shouldn't have to take responsibility. As the top dog, it's his job to take responsibility, even if it isn't his fault.
And just to widen this beyond RBS, I mean, the kind of recent controversy has been specifically about RBS, but are the Taxpayers Alliance against the principle of bonuses being paid at any bank which has had public money invested?
As far as we're concerned, it's an issue of taxpayers' money, of course. So where banks have taken taxpayers' money, where banks are still mostly owned or controlled by the government, we don't believe that bonuses should be paid. But beyond that, the real issue for us is let's just get these banks out of government hands, out of taxpayers' hands, so that we don't have to worry about what bonus you want to pay your chief executive.
Len Shackleton, the government has been very clear that it didn't want to get involved in this argument to any sort of substantive extent. It didn't want to be seen as actually setting what executive pay was. Were they right?
They were right to steer clear of it, and indeed the recent involvement of government in sort of naming and shaming, I think, is turning back the clock 30 years or so. Governments ought to stay out of this kind of thing. I agree with Emma. Let's get the banks back into the private sector, but I want this to be done at a price which returns something to the taxpayers who've put the money up for this. And I think the best way to do this is to motivate, to incentivise the bank's management to do do a very good job. And I think actually Stephen Hester has been doing a good job, despite what Emma says. And we want to encourage him to do so in the future.
Do you accept, though, that, I mean, in terms of the public perception of this particular case, not just Stephen Hester, but the issue of pay at banks that have had public money put into them anyway, that there is a great deal of public anger surrounding it, and it's really understandable, isn't it?
Well, yes, if you listen to phone-ins and you look at the blogs and so forth, you've got a lot of very angry people out there. But I don't think this anger is focused solely on the banks, solely on the state-owned banks. It's right across the board. And of course, there are many people who are in the shadows somewhere, who are earning vastly more than Stephen Hester and his colleagues. In many other parts of the economy. If you look at, I mean, only a couple of weeks ago, we've had an attack really on the whole idea of FTSE 100 chief executives getting enormous amounts of money. But of course, they are the tip of an iceberg, because nobody, no organisation has to be in the FTSE 100. But, companies can go private, they can stay out of this and be out of the public eye. So I think this public outrage, although it has to be taken into account by politicians, is something we ought to think about carefully, because I think it's very ill-directed.
Ronnie Fox, we've just heard about contracts there. There was some suggestion that Mr. Hester's contract should be somehow looked at to ensure that this doesn't happen in future. Wouldn't that, in essence, mean that any contract in this country wouldn't be worth the paper it was written on if they could be ex post facto revisited?
That's what it would mean. Whatever the future may bring, Mr. Hester has got a contract. It provides for a bonus opportunity. It was necessary to offer him a bonus opportunity to get him to take on the job. And it's really quite wrong that political pressure has forced him into a position where he feels he has to give up his bonus. That is very wrong. I think you should go back to the basics when it comes to a bonus. A bonus is designed to reward individual performance. Yes, it takes account of the performance of the organisation as a whole and what's going on in the marketplace. But first and foremost, it's designed to reflect individual performance. And you can have somebody who's performing extremely well in an organisation which isn't doing very well. And you have to reward that person, because otherwise the organisation's results would be even worse. I think Stephen Hester has done a good job. I think that in terms of the realization of the assets, the aircraft leasing business, he did extremely well. It's a difficult job to close down parts of an operation, but he's making a good fist of it, and I think that he should be rewarded. I think that the sort of people who go into the top jobs in the banking sector will expect bonus opportunities, and I don't think you can revisit either existing contracts or the principle for the future.
Emma Boon, I think you want to come in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that we made there, because it seems there is a bit of an issue here with timing. And as you know, Len agreed with me on this. Let's just get the banks out of taxpayers' hands so that we don't have to worry about this. As far as the Taxpayers Alliance is concerned, once RBS is no longer mostly owned by taxpayers, by the government, they can pay Stephen Hester whatever bonus they want. Now, when taxpayers, bought all these shares, they were worth about 43p each, and they're now worth about 27p each. So we've seen a significant loss in the value of our stake in the bank. And whatever you agree or disagree about whether or not Mr. Hester's done a good job and whether or not he is responsible for that share price dropping, one thing's for sure is if you think that he's doing the right thing, and UKFI clearly does think he's doing the right thing, they're working together with him, then why not just say to him, look, Stephen, once the bank is out of taxpayers' hands, you can have whatever bonus you like. But this year, when it's still in taxpayers' hands, you can't have that bonus. So if you really believe in your own, in your own rhetoric, if you really believe that you're making the right decisions and you're confident your strategy is going to pay dividends at some stage in the future, then why can't his bonus just wait?
What do you say, Emma Boon, to the argument that bonuses are an essential component for a bank like RBS to be able to attract and retain the best staff that are needed to then make the bank a more attractive proposition to be reflated back into the private ownership?
Certainly, I think that there's some sense in that argument, but again, it just comes back to timing. I do think that you cannot be totally blind to the political sensitivities and how the public will perceive those sorts of rewards. Let's not forget why we're all having this conversation about Hester's bonus in the first place. It's because taxpayers had to bail the bank out because it was doing so badly, because there was such a huge risk, and we had to have this whole conversation about why taxpayers are bailing out the banks in the first place. There's a whole other debate we could have about that. But if there really is a strong case for saying, look, you've got to pay the money to get the top people, even if it's taxpayers' money, then let's just say, look, you can have that money once the bank is out of taxpayers' hands. I've got no problem with paying bonuses to bankers, otherwise. It's just when it's taxpayers' money, it is a difference.
Len Shackleton, is there a difference between what is legally permissible and what is morally or ethically acceptable to the public when it comes to these bonuses?
Well, the public, as I say, can be very selective on this. My colleague Mark Littlewood was saying the other day that Stephen Hester is being paid what a middle-ranking Premier League player is getting. And, why is the public so selective in this kind of antipathy? I don't know. But to go back to what Emma was saying, I mean, that all sounds very reasonable about sitting down with Stephen and say, look, you can have your bonus once the thing is out of the public hands. Fair enough. But that was a conversation which should have been had by Alistair Darling or his master's voice, Gordon Brown, at the time when this contract was made. To unilaterally tear up, nothing has changed fundamentally since that contract was drawn up, apart from this largely manufactured outrage from the Daily Mail and other media like that.
Ronnie Fox, you wrote an opinion piece in Personnel Today in which you criticised the FSA proposals for attempting to regulate banks on the basis of how risky it deems their bonus structures are. I mean, in essence, is it such a bad idea? Wasn't it the practice of risk linked to bonus structures that in part landed us in this mess in the first place?
No, I don't think that's right. I think that the risk which is assumed by anybody who goes into business is just not widely understood. Yes, people make money by assuming risks, and the banks work that way too. A good illustration is the pressure on banks to lend to businesses, because banks are at the moment being criticized for not lending to small businesses. At the same time, they're being criticized for taking decisions which are too risky. They can't win, and that has to be wrong. I also don't agree that the desire to earn money by way of bonus influenced many major decisions when it came to what kind of transaction the bank would enter into. I think that, by and large, the senior people at banks want to do the best thing for the bank, in the expectation that they will be properly and fairly rewarded. One of the reasons why the share price of RBS has fallen so much is because it is now realized in the city that the people involved in the leadership of that organization may not be rewarded properly for political reasons, and that therefore it will prove increasingly difficult to attract the best people, retain the best people at RBS. And that means that the time when one can hope that RBS will return to private ownership is extended indefinitely into the future.
The crucial question in this, though, does seem to be this link between pay and or bonuses and the performance of an institution. How, in your view, do you get that balance right?
Let us assume that there's an organization which is making a loss of £100 million a year. But there's one guy who's making a profit of £200 million a year for that organization. So if he weren't there, instead of making a loss of 100 million, it would be making a loss of 300 million. But because he's there, it's only 100 million. He's been making a profit of 200 million. Do you recognize that that guy has to be rewarded, irrespective of the performance of the organization, because of his own individual performance? I think you have to recognize that, and that he therefore has to receive a large